His lawyer leaned in and whispered 5 words. Just 5. And Vincent's face, that confident, self-satisfied expression I had stared at across the breakfast table for 15 years, drained of color instantly. His hands began to shake. The documents he had been so eager to sign trembled in his grip. And for the first time in 3 years, I smiled. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start at the beginning, because you need to understand how we arrived here. How a woman everyone believed had lost her grip was actually playing the longest, most deliberate game of her life. My name is Alexis Dunst. I'm 34 years old, and until 3 months ago, I was married to Vincent Mercer. 15 years of marriage. Longer than most Hollywood relationships, longer than some small countries have existed, and certainly longer than my patience should have lasted. But I've always been stubborn. I inherited that from my grandmother. I met Vincent when I was 17. I had graduated high school early, not because I was exceptional, but because I was practical, motivated, and determined to leave my parents' house. I took a job at Henderson and Price law firm as a file clerk. Minimum wage, constant paper cuts, but it was my job. By 18, I'd moved up to legal assistant. I was good with details, numbers, and knowing when to stay quiet while paying attention. Vincent was 24 when we met at a client event. He was charming, ambitious, and obsessed with building a real estate empire. He spoke about the future as if it already belonged to him, as though success was simply waiting for his arrival. He said he was going to build something remarkable. I said I could help with the paperwork. That was our version of romance. We married when I was 19. Tyler was born when I was 20. I continued working part-time at the law firm while raising our son, contributing to my 401k, and saving every extra dollar. My grandmother always told me a woman should have her own money. Not hidden money, she'd say. Just money that was hers. Something no one could take away. At 23, Vincent's business finally gained traction. He asked me to leave the law firm and work with him full-time. He needed someone to manage finances, deal with clients, coordinate contractors. Someone he trusted completely. So I became his unpaid everything. Bookkeeper, office manager, client contact, model home decorator, marketing support, event planner. I handled it all while raising Tyler, running our household, and keeping everyone functioning. My official role was wife. My actual role was everything else. For 11 years, I invested myself in building Vincent's vision. For 11 years, he received the credit, the awards, the recognition. At industry events, I was introduced as Vincent's wife. At celebrations, he thanked his team, his mentors, his foresight, yet somehow never mentioned me. Over time, the dynamic changed. He stopped consulting me on decisions. He stayed late at work more often. He began criticizing small things: how I dressed, what I cooked, my so-called lack of ambition. Lack of ambition, while I ran his entire back office without pay, raised his son, and kept his life organized. Then, 3 months ago, he ended it. He came home on a Tuesday evening while I was cooking his favorite meal. Apparently, I'm persistent when it comes to unrecognized effort. He sat me down at the kitchen table with a neutral, business-like expression. Not regretful, not apologetic. "I want a divorce," he said. "Then I want the house, the cars, the business, everything. You can keep Tyler." He said it as if he were placing an order. Assets for him, the child for me. As though our 15-year-old son were an inconvenience he was generously leaving behind. I stared at him. 15 years ended at our kitchen table, between the salt shaker and the butter dish, like I was just another item being discarded. What I didn't know then, what I wouldn't learn until later, was that Vincent had been planning this for months. He already had a lawyer, Harold Whitfield. Expensive, experienced. He had been preparing his exit while I was planning meals and scheduling his appointments. I had been blindsided by the man I trusted completely. The next day, his mother arrived. Lorraine Mercer, who had treated me like staff for 15 years, came with her polished hair and carefully practiced sympathy. She patted my hand and suggested I should have worked harder to keep him satisfied. "Men have needs, dear," she said, as though explaining something complex to a child. Her advice was ironic, considering her husband spent every day on the golf course to avoid her company. But apparently, I was still at fault. That first week passed in a haze. Vincent moved me into the guest room. Documents were drafted, settlements proposed, timelines set. Everything moved quickly, and I felt overwhelmed. To everyone else, I looked like a woman whose life had collapsed, a wife discarded after 15 years, a victim caught off guard. But what Vincent didn't know, what no one knew, was that 3 years earlier, I had discovered something buried in his financial records, something he believed was permanently concealed, and I had been quietly preparing ever since. Before continuing, if you're enjoying this story, please subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. I read every comment. Thank you. Now back to the situation. Within a week, Vincent had taken full control. The guest room became my permanent space in what used to be our home. My closet was reduced from a walk-in to 2 small sections he allowed me to keep. The message was clear. This was no longer my house. 2 weeks later, he brought her home. Brittany Sawyer, 27, an employee at his company. Of course she was. She had the curated social media look, blonde highlights, flawless nails, expensive yoga pants. She walked into my kitchen as if it belonged to her, wearing my apron, my grandmother's apron, using my blender to make smoothies. She was younger than my marriage and younger than my favorite handbag, but apparently excellent at smoothies. Vincent displayed her openly. They sat on my couch, watched my television, ate from my plates. He put his arm around her in front of me, treating me like background furniture, as if I had already ceased to exist. The disrespect escalated. First, he canceled my personal credit card. "We need to separate finances," he said calmly. Then he canceled the joint card. Soon after, he suggested I should consider staying somewhere else while things were resolved. I was being asked to leave my own home. Lorraine returned to help me pack. By help, she meant deciding what I was allowed to keep. Old clothes were acceptable. Some family photos. My grandmother's recipe box. She hesitated over that one. Anything I wasn't permitted to take included jewelry Vincent had bought me, furniture I had chosen, or anything valuable. Those were marital assets, she explained, and therefore his. She packed my belongings in garbage bags, not boxes. Garbage bags, like waste being removed. Through all of this, there was one person I believed I could trust, Diane Holloway. We'd been friends since high school. 20 years of shared history, relationships, children, life changes. She was the first person I called after Vincent's announcement. She checked in constantly, listened, brought wine, told me I deserved better, said Vincent was making a mistake. Yet something felt wrong. Vincent seemed to know my plans before I acted on them. When I told Diane I was thinking of fighting for the house, Tyler came home the next day saying his father told him it was pointless. When I mentioned apartment hunting in a specific neighborhood, Vincent commented that the area would be too expensive for me. That's when it became clear. In hindsight, the signs had been there for years. The way Diane brightened when Vincent entered a room. How she praised him a little too often, laughed a little too eagerly. She always asked about him first. How's Vincent? How's the business? Is he happy? She had been holding feelings for my husband for 15 years. And Vincent, who collected admiration the way others collect souvenirs, knew exactly how to use it. He made her feel important, different, valued. He likely implied there might be something after the divorce, just enough hope to secure her loyalty. My closest friend had become his informant. 20 years of friendship traded for attention and empty promises. And somehow, that still wasn't the worst part. It wasn't Lorraine. It wasn't even Diane. The worst part was Tyler. My son saw everything. The girlfriend, his grandmother packing my things, the way his father looked at me as if I no longer mattered. And Vincent was working on him steadily, feeding him small comments every day. "Your mom is making this harder than it needs to be. I just want everyone to be happy. She's the one dragging this out. I'm trying to be fair, but she won't cooperate." Tyler began pulling away. Not angry, just distant and confused. He didn't know who to trust, and his father was very convincing. I could lose the house, I could lose the money, I could lose everything I had spent 15 years building. But watching my son start to see me as the problem, that was the real damage. I hired a lawyer, Nina Castellano, recommended by my former firm. 52 years old, sharp, direct, and with zero patience for nonsense. She reviewed everything and outlined the strategy. "You helped build this business," she said. "You're entitled to half. The house, the company, the accounts, we fight. I looked at her for a long moment. What if I don't want to fight? Nina stared at me like I'd lost my ability to speak, like I'd suggested sending Vincent a thank you card instead. She assumed I was broken, worn down, unable to stand up for myself. She had no idea. Tyler and I moved into a small apartment. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, and a kitchen barely larger than my old pantry. Half our boxes didn't fit, and ended up stacked in Tyler's room, a visible reminder of how far we'd fallen. Meanwhile, Vincent posted photos with Brittany. New chapter, new energy. Blessed, he wrote. Lorraine commented, so happy for you, sweetheart. You deserve joy. My sister called, furious, telling me to get an aggressive lawyer and take him for everything. Everyone had advice. Everyone thought they knew what I should do. Everyone saw a woman who had given up. Everyone was wrong. There's something powerful about being underestimated. People stop paying attention. They stop protecting their secrets. And that's when you learn the most. 3 years. That's how long I'd been carrying this information. 3 years since I learned the truth about Vincent Mercer and his polished, impressive, completely fake empire. It started on a random Tuesday night, 3 years before the divorce. Vincent was working late again. I was reviewing company books, reconciling accounts, handling the unglamorous work that kept everything running. That's when I noticed something off. Transfers to accounts I didn't recognize. Then more transfers. Then a pattern. Money moving into places I'd never seen. I stayed up until 3 in the morning tracing it. What I found was alarming. Vincent had taken loans against everything we owned. The house, the one everyone admired, had 3 mortgages. The original loan of $400,000, a second mortgage of $350,000 from 4 years earlier, a third for another $350,000 taken 2 years after that. Total debt, $1.1 million. Actual value, $850,000. We were $250,000 underwater on a house I believed we owned outright. The business was worse. Lines of credit maxed at $200,000. Back taxes of $85,000. Vendor debt of $120,000. Equipment loans totaling $75,000. The company Vincent praised at every gathering was buried under nearly $500,000 in debt. Even the cars weren't owned. 3 leases with balloon payments approaching. We didn't own anything. We just paid large monthly bills. At 3 in the morning, surrounded by paperwork, I did the math. Roughly $1.9 million in debt. Actual asset value around $1.6 million. At best, we were at least $300,000 in the negative. Then I asked the obvious question, where did the money go? Over the following weeks, I tracked every transaction I could. The picture was clear and disturbing. Cryptocurrency investments, $180,000 lost. Gambling, $75,000 gone. An apartment I didn't know about, rented for someone I didn't know about, $60,000 in rent and furnishings. Luxury expenses that never came home, watches, suits, trips I wasn't invited on, another $85,000. Vincent wasn't building an empire. He was stacking borrowed money into a fragile structure. From the outside, it looked impressive. Up close, it was empty. My first instinct was to confront him, to demand answers. But I knew Vincent. He would twist the story, explain it away, make me question myself, and possibly try to access my separate funds, because I always kept some money of my own. My grandmother's voice never left me. A woman should have her own money. I still had my IRA from my law firm years, rolled over and untouched, worth about $180,000. That was mine, and when my grandmother passed away, she left me $340,000, clearly stated in her will as mine alone. I kept it separate for 6 years, never mixing it with marital funds. In total, I had about $520,000 that was legally and completely mine. So I didn't confront Vincent. I protected myself. With my uncle, a retired accountant, I set up an irrevocable trust for Tyler. My IRA and inheritance went into that trust. I wasn't a beneficiary. Vincent certainly wasn't. It was for Tyler's future, and it couldn't be touched. Then I documented everything. Mortgages, hidden accounts, questionable transfers. Copies went to my sister's house, a safe deposit box, and an encrypted drive. Then I waited. Men like Vincent always leave eventually. They get restless. They think they deserve more. I just needed to be ready. 3 years of waiting. 3 years of watching him make it worse. 3 years of smiling at events while knowing our life was built on unstable ground. When he finally asked for a divorce and demanded the house, the business, the cars, everything, I nearly laughed. He wasn't asking for assets. He was asking for debt. He just didn't know it yet. Back in the present, I sat across from Nina and placed 3 binders on her desk. 3 years of documentation. She read silently for almost an hour. When she looked up, her expression had changed. "You've known for 3 years?" I told her I was waiting for him to leave. When he demanded everything, he demanded the debt too. Nina leaned back. The pity was gone. What replaced it was respect. If I signed over the assets, I walked away clean. He got the mortgages, the loans, the leases. My inheritance and retirement, separate, protected, sitting safely in trust for my son. After a long pause, she smiled. She admitted she'd misjudged me. I smiled back. That was intentional. From that point on, the plan was simple. The trap was set. The numbers were verified. All I had to do was let Vincent believe he was winning. The next 3 months were pure performance. I became exactly what everyone expected: defeated, fragile, overwhelmed. At mediation, I spoke quietly, asked for almost nothing. "I just want enough to start over," I said. I asked for $50,000 cash, my personal items, and shared custody of Tyler. Vincent agreed immediately. He looked at me with something close to pity, convinced he'd won. With every week, his confidence grew. He told anyone who would listen that I hadn't fought at all. Lorraine bragged everywhere she went. Vincent was keeping everything. And that was exactly the point. That woman didn't get a dime. I always knew she wasn't strong enough for my son. To celebrate what he believed was his upcoming win, Vincent bought himself a new watch, $15,000. I know the exact amount because I saw the charge hit the business account. He was still using company funds for personal purchases, still deepening the problem he refused to see. He wore the watch to our next mediation session, making sure I noticed. He also took Brittany to dinner at La Maison, the French restaurant where we had celebrated our 10th anniversary. He posted photos online. "Life is good when you're with the right person," he wrote. By right person, he meant the one who still didn't know about his financial reality. At the same time, Brittany began redecorating my house. New furniture in the living room, new artwork on the walls. She even painted my kitchen gray. Gray. I had spent 3 weeks choosing that sage green, testing samples, adjusting lighting, trying to get it exactly right. And she covered it with basic builder gray without hesitation. Gray like her taste, and very likely like her future with Vincent once the truth surfaced. It was fitting. Diane kept calling, pretending to check on me while clearly searching for information. I played the role perfectly. "How are you doing?" she'd ask, full of practiced concern. "I just want this over," I'd reply, letting my voice waver. "I don't have the energy to fight anymore." Within hours, Vincent would know. I could almost feel him relax, becoming even less careful. Diane thought she was manipulating me. In reality, she was just passing messages along. While the adults played their roles, Tyler was paying attention. My son, observant, thoughtful, and far more perceptive than anyone gave him credit for, started noticing the inconsistencies. He saw his father's new $15,000 watch, but was told they couldn't afford the school trip to Washington, D.C. He saw Brittany's shopping bags piling up in the entryway, while Vincent complained about money being tight. He noticed the gap between the image his father projected and the explanations he offered. One evening, Tyler came to my small apartment and sat at my secondhand kitchen table. He looked at me seriously. "Mom," he said, "is Dad actually rich?" I asked him what he thought. He paused, then said, "I think something's wrong. I think he's pretending." I squeezed his hand and told him to wait a little longer. My 15-year-old figured it out before 2 lawyers and a certified accountant. I should probably charge consulting fees to his college fund. Behind the scenes, Nina was finalizing our legal approach with exacting precision. The primary divorce agreement clearly stated that I was giving up all claims to marital property. The house, the business, the vehicles, everything would transfer to Vincent. In return, I would receive my modest cash settlement and exit cleanly. Attached to that agreement, however, was a detailed liability disclosure. Every mortgage, every loan, every obligation connected to those assets was listed. By accepting the assets, Vincent was also accepting full responsibility for the liabilities. The mortgages became his alone. The business debt transferred entirely to him. The vehicle leases became his issue. It was all documented clearly, legally, and thoroughly. Nina once told me legal documents are like poetry, boring, expensive poetry that can quietly destroy someone's life. 2 weeks before the final hearing, Vincent's lawyer, Harold Whitfield, called Nina with concerns. He explained that his client was assuming significant assets and requested a full financial audit before finalizing the agreement. Nina agreed calmly to provide any documentation needed. When Harold raised this with Vincent, it was shut down immediately. "No audits," Vincent said. "I built that company. I know what it's worth. I'm not paying someone to tell me what I already know." Harold advised him strongly to verify the numbers. Vincent cut him off. Brittany wanted it done. He wanted it done. No delays. Harold had practiced law for more than 30 years. He recognized a mistake when he saw one, and he also knew he couldn't force a client to listen. He presented Vincent with a waiver stating that an independent review had been recommended and declined against counsel's advice. Vincent signed without reading it, just like he signed everything else. Never underestimate how quickly a man will skip fine print when encouraged by an impatient girlfriend. The night before the hearing, Vincent texted me, "Thank you for not making this ugly." I stared at that message for a long time. 15 years of marriage, 15 years of building his business, raising his son, managing his life, and he was thanking me for being cooperative while discarding me. I replied, "I just want what's best for Tyler." And I meant it. His future was protected, his trust was secure, and his father was about to learn a very costly lesson. Nina called me that evening, Thursday, 9 a.m. Final hearing. Judge Patricia Holden. Was I ready? I looked around my small apartment, the secondhand furniture, the unpacked boxes, the tiny kitchen I'd repainted sage green because it reminded me of hope. I'd been ready for 3 years. Thursday morning arrived. 9 o'clock. Vincent walked into the courthouse expecting to collect his reward. He had no idea he was about to inherit a financial collapse, one he had demanded and signed for himself. The courtroom was quiet, sunlight filtering through tall windows, the scent of old wood and polish in the air. This was where 15 years of marriage would officially end, and 3 years of patience would finally pay off. Vincent arrived first, wearing his best suit, the charcoal Armani I'd helped him choose years earlier. His new watch caught the light as he greeted Harold. He looked confident, relaxed, certain of the outcome. Brittany waited in the hallway, perfectly styled, scrolling through her phone. Lorraine sat in the gallery, dressed for the occasion, already pleased. When I entered, she gave me a small, satisfied smile. I arrived a few minutes later, wearing a simple navy dress, no jewelry, hair pulled back. I looked tired, resigned, finished, exactly as planned. Judge Patricia Holden entered and the room rose. Early 60s, silver hair, decades on the family court bench. She had seen everything. She reviewed the file, then spoke. Mercer versus Mercer. Final dissolution hearing. I understand the parties have reached an agreement. Harold stood. Yes, Your Honor. My client, Vincent Mercer, is assuming all marital assets, including the family residence, the real estate development business, and all associated vehicles. In exchange, Mrs. Dunst receives a cash settlement of $50,000. Nina stood beside me. That's correct, Your Honor. My client agrees to give up all claims to these assets and accepts the proposed settlement terms. Judge Holden shifted her attention to me. She studied my expression carefully, likely looking for any sign that I was being pressured into a poor agreement. Mrs. Dunst, she said, I need to confirm that you fully understand what you're agreeing to today. You are surrendering your claim to significant property, the family home and the business you helped build. Are you certain this is what you want? I kept my voice quiet, slightly unsteady by design. Yes, Your Honor, I understand. She continued, and you're entering this agreement voluntarily? No one is forcing you? No, Your Honor. I glanced down at my hands, then back up. I just want my husband to have everything he asked for. I want this to be over. The judge studied me for another moment. I could almost sense her weighing whether to intervene, to delay proceedings, or to protect me from what appeared to be a serious mistake. But I was represented, coherent, and clearly answering her questions. Very well, she said. Let's proceed. The clerk handed out the final documents, page after page of dense legal language, signatures required again and again. Vincent signed quickly, barely looking at the pages. He wanted this finished. He was ready to move on to his new life, his new relationship, his freedom. I signed slowly and carefully, each stroke deliberate. This was the moment I had waited 3 years for. I wasn't going to rush it. Across the room, Vincent glanced at Lorraine and smiled. She nodded back, satisfied. In the hallway, his phone vibrated, likely Brittany sending encouragement. He checked it during his own divorce hearing. That was typical. Harold Whitfield, meanwhile, was doing what experienced lawyers do. He reviewed the entire document set one last time. Main agreement signed, asset schedule signed, settlement terms signed. Then he reached the addendum, the liability disclosure statement. I watched his expression change as he read. Confusion passed across his face. He flipped back a page, then forward again, as if hoping he had misunderstood. He hadn't. His face went pale. He leaned toward Vincent and whispered, "Sir, we need to talk." Vincent waved him off, still riding the moment. "Not now. We're almost done." Harold's voice sharpened. "You're assuming all the debt." Vincent turned toward him. "What?" Harold pointed quietly at the paperwork. "The mortgages, the business liens, it's all here. You're personally responsible for everything." For the first time, Vincent actually looked at what he had signed. I watched his eyes move across the numbers and saw the color drain from his face. The house, $1.1 million owed. Market value, $850,000. Business debt, $480,000. Vehicle lease obligations, $115,000. Additional liabilities, $200,000. Total debt, roughly $1.9 million. Net value of the assets he had just claimed, negative $300,000. He hadn't won anything. He had inherited the bill. Vincent jumped to his feet, his chair scraping loudly. "This isn't right." He looked at me, then the judge, then back to the papers. "She hid this from me. This is fraud." Judge Holden's voice cut through the room. "Mr. Mercer, sit down." "These numbers are false," Vincent argued, his voice rising. "She manipulated the documents." "Mr. Mercer," the judge said firmly, "sit down." He obeyed, but his hands were shaking. His confidence was gone, replaced by visible panic. Judge Holden reviewed the documents again. "Mr. Mercer, I'm looking at the liability disclosure attached to this agreement. These are debts tied to assets you are claiming, your property, your business." She looked directly at him. "Are you telling this court you don't know your own financial position?" Silence followed. His attempt to explain his ignorance was unconvincing. Harold cleared his throat. "Your Honor, for the record, I advised my client to obtain an independent financial review before today. He declined. I have documentation." He produced the waiver Vincent had signed without reading, confirming that he rejected an audit against legal advice. Judge Holden reviewed it briefly. "So Mr. Mercer was advised to verify these figures and chose not to. He signed a waiver acknowledging that decision." She looked at Vincent. "Is that correct?" Vincent stared at the document. I thought. Is that your signature?" After a pause, he said, "Yes." "Then you assumed this risk voluntarily," Judge Holden said. "You had the opportunity to investigate and chose not to. The agreement stands." Vincent turned toward me, desperation breaking through. "You knew," he said, his voice cracking. "You knew all of this." I met his eyes calmly. "I was your bookkeeper for 11 years, Vincent. I knew everything." His face shifted through disbelief, anger, betrayal, fear, and finally understanding. He turned back to the judge. "I want to withdraw the agreement. I didn't understand what I was signing. This isn't fair." Judge Holden shook her head. "Mr. Mercer, you signed documents stating you understood and agreed to all terms. You were represented by competent counsel and declined further review. Your wife concealed nothing. These are your debts and obligations. The agreement is final." The gavel came down. "Mrs. Dunst, you have your settlement. Mr. Mercer, you have the assets as agreed, along with all associated liabilities. This marriage is dissolved." I stood, smoothed my dress, and picked up my purse. I looked at Vincent one last time. He sat slumped, papers scattered, his world collapsing in real time. "You said you wanted everything except Tyler," I said quietly. "I gave you exactly what you asked for." I walked out without looking back. In the hallway, Vincent was already shouting at Harold, accusing him, threatening legal action. Harold's voice remained steady. "I advised an audit. You refused. It's documented. Through the glass doors, I saw Brittany's expression change as she listened. She looked at Vincent and saw something different from the man she thought she knew. She was gone before I reached the elevator, heels clicking quickly, not turning around. Her exit was faster than her arrival. At least that was consistent. Outside, the April sun was warm, the sky clear. Behind me, my ex-husband was shouting about fairness, fraud, and blame. Ahead of me was a new life, smaller, simpler, but entirely mine. The fallout came quickly. Within 2 weeks, Brittany moved out, leaving in the middle of the night with a note that read, "This isn't what I signed up for." The gray kitchen sat empty. Within a month, Vincent tried to sell the house, but when debt exceeds value, buyers disappear. Banks and realtors remained. Within 2 months, the business began defaulting. Vendors sued. Credit lines froze. The company Vincent bragged about and I had supported for years collapsed. Within 3 months, Vincent was consulting bankruptcy attorneys, trying to determine what little he could shield from creditors. The answer was almost nothing. Lorraine's perfect son began calling relatives for loans, showing up with explanations and excuses, asking for help. Nobody knew about the debt. Alexis must have concealed it somehow. I was misled. That was the claim, but the paperwork told another story. The mortgages were in his name. The loans were in his name. The gambling losses, the failed crypto investments, the secret apartment, every decision, every signature belonged to him. I later heard that Lorraine's Christmas newsletter that year was unusually brief. Vincent is exploring new opportunities. Yes, opportunities in debt restructuring. In the end, the overlapping conflicts resolved themselves with a kind of quiet symmetry. Diane called about a week after the hearing. Her voice trembled. She said she had no idea things were this serious and apologized, saying she never meant for any of it to happen, that she thought Vincent and she trailed off. I didn't answer. I didn't return the call. I didn't give her the closure she wanted. Some bridges aren't meant to be rebuilt. Some friendships don't deserve another chance. 20 years of shared history traded for a wink and empty promises from a man who used everyone around him. She called 3 more times, then stopped. I assume she's still waiting for Vincent to notice her. She will be waiting a long time. Lorraine tried another route and went through Tyler. She told him to tell me she didn't know about the financial problems, that she was sorry for how she treated me, that she wanted to talk. Tyler looked at his grandmother, the woman who packed his mother's belongings into garbage bags, who called his mother worthless, who sided with his father without asking a single question and said, "Mom's busy building her life. She doesn't have time for excuses." Lorraine wanted forgiveness. I wanted peace. Only one of us got what we wanted. Tyler, my smart, observant son, finally understood everything. Not because I explained it, but because he put it together himself. He saw the court documents. He heard his father's explanations. He watched Brittany leave. He saw Lorraine scramble and the entire image collapse. About a month after the divorce, he sat with me in my small apartment, the one with the sage green kitchen, secondhand furniture, and boxes finally unpacked. "You waited 3 years," he said quietly. "You knew the whole time and just waited." I told him I needed to make sure he was protected. No matter what happened between his father and me, I had to know he would be okay. The trust fund, $520,000, was safe and untouched. He was silent for a moment, then hugged me. A real hug. The kind I hadn't received from my 15-year-old in months. The kind that said he understood. The kind that said he was proud. 15-year-old boys don't usually hug their mothers without being asked. I knew I had done something right. My $50,000 settlement went toward getting established. First month's rent, security deposit, and basic furniture that wasn't falling apart. It wasn't luxury, but it was stability. The trust fund stayed exactly where it was. Tyler's future, college, maybe a first home one day, a safety net no one could touch. I enrolled in interior design courses at the community college, the dream I'd set aside at 23 to help Vincent build his company. I was finally building my own life. I started small. My first real client was Sandra, 52, newly out of a 28-year marriage. She stood in her empty apartment, unsure, and asked, "How do you start over?" I thought for a moment and said, "1 room at a time, 1 color at a time, 1 day at a time." We painted her kitchen sage green. She cried when she saw it. Happy tears, she said. The color of new beginnings. About 3 months after the divorce was finalized, Vincent showed up at my apartment. I barely recognized him. He had lost weight, not in a healthy way. Dark circles framed his eyes. His suit was wrinkled. His watch was gone. He looked like someone worn down by his own decisions. He stood in my doorway, and for a brief moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. He said he didn't know it was this bad, that he'd made mistakes, that he understood that now, and that he never meant for any of it to happen. I leaned against the doorframe and looked at him carefully. The man I had loved for nearly half my life, the man who discarded me, now overwhelmed by the consequences of his choices. "Can we talk?" he asked. "Maybe we can work something out." He couldn't finish the thought. He couldn't ask directly for what he wanted, my help. "You asked for everything except Tyler," I said calmly. "You got exactly what you asked for." He said my name quietly. I said goodbye and closed the door. He stood in the hallway for 10 minutes. I know because I watched through the peephole while eating ice cream. It was oddly satisfying. That evening, after Tyler went to bed, I sat in my small living room and looked at my grandmother's photo on the shelf. The recipe box sat beside it. The one thing Lorraine nearly took, the one thing that mattered most. I said quietly, "You were right about everything. Keep your own money, know your worth, and never let anyone make you feel small." The apartment was quiet and modest, nothing like the house I lived in for 15 years, but it was mine. Every color, every piece of furniture, every choice belonged to me. For the first time in longer than I could remember, I was free. Thank you for watching. More of my most compelling stories are already on your screen. Click one now so you don't miss the best part. I'll see you in the next story.